In the 2016 Daily Telegraph, they ran this piece when Australia toured India. It's not that other test nations don't end up with weird arguments and nonsense during their series. That's a fairly standard cricket thing. It's part of being a national sport. But it's that Australia and India are so much better and madder at it. That tour was promoted in India as Let's Bully the Bully by the host broadcaster. So there's nothing surprising about this series. It's just that so much of this madness has just been about India.
This show is called Last Knock. I don't really understand why it is called that.
It starts with Rohit Sharma, who missed the start of the series because, I don't know, something to do with the IPL final, he was injured or 70% fit. I mean, who knows? Either way, in classic Rohit style, he annoyed your uncle when he appeared in the IPL final. He annoyed your cousins when he was made vice-captain halfway through a tour he didn't even turn up at the start for. And he annoyed anyone left standing when he hit the ball straight up in the air in Sydney. It was Rohit in Excelsius. And if Rohit is the current whipping boy, then the one before that is Ishant Sharma, who used to make people cry through laughter and anger, usually at the same time. Now when he misses a game, it is completely different because he's really good now. And it wasn't like Ishant was going to be missing the game. He was going to be missing the entire series. And not just him, but also India's most dependable sergeant was out as well. But as much as I might love Bhaveshna Kumar, for other people, perhaps there was a bigger name person who was going to be out. Virat Kohli was going to miss playing for India because of the birth of his own child. Infant before India was a headline I hope someone used. People were very upset though. I suppose when I think about modern life, people are usually upset at most things. Why wouldn't you take umbrage at a professional man taking paternity leave? Although I suppose we should ask how a cricketer can be so good at timing his drives, but then so poor at when he disposes of his bodily fluids into his partner. It was obviously quite a stupid thing that happened here, but that's what happens when so many people invest in the Indian cricket team. They forget that sometimes these people are dads and humans and daddy humans. But still, people took to social media to blame a womb. But of all the players who ended up missing for India, you would have to suggest that Virat Kohli's omission was the most self-inflicted. Of course, it got a whole lot worse when Virat was booked to fly out a few hours after his team didn't bat for a few hours. It was one of the most embarrassing and catastrophic innings, I mean, if you can call it an innings, that we've had in a long time. Put it this way, if Indian cricket is worth $10 billion, and why not, I just gave it a random number, that means they were paying about $270 million per run. And it wasn't just the 36 all out. I mean, one of those wickets wasn't even a wicket, it was retired hurt. And not only had they played their worst innings of a generation, they managed to lose their second best bowler while doing it. As Oscar Wilde once said, to be bowled out for 36 is unlucky. To lose your bowler's arm, well, that's careless. And in the very next test, India lost another bowler. Although oddly, India went 2-0 in the test where they lost a bowler. It may be a tactic that they want to look at going forward. I've seen episodes of MASH with less casualties. And they were casualties, they weren't niggles. Everyone was just out of the series straight away. But India won. And at least in part because Ravichandran Ashwin was having some incredible series. And that on its own is very crazy. Off spinners don't travel to Australia. They're like cricket's version of Guinness. And all of that is a huge problem for any team who depends on finger spin when they get to Australia. They struggle to be economical. They don't take many wickets. And Ashwin had done that like, I don't know, how many times has he been to Australia? 74 by this point? And even when he'd bowl well in Australia, things just didn't fall for him. And yet in the first two tests, Ashwin had 12 wickets at 15. Saqlain Mushtaq didn't do that with a doosra. And all of this helped India win the next test. Now it's not quite the comeback it was hailed as Australia have proved all the way through this series. And these teams are obviously fairly evenly matched. As I also tried to point out at the time, sporting teams have natural fluctuations due to luck and circumstances and conditions, the ability to catch a ball apparently. But overall, it was still an incredible effort by India. A bowler down and their captain back home Googling what cervical effacement means. And 2 tests into this series, they'd already lost 3 of their 4 best seam bowlers. And they made it worse when they had a COVID protocol breach. It seems like there may or may not have been a hug in a noodle joint. No one can remember. Who knows if they've hugged an Indian cricketer or not. And while that was happening, a Queensland politician with no authority over anything decided to chip in.
Well, look, if the Indians don't want to play by the rules, don't come.
Yes, it went exactly this odd. And then India played their own politics by leaking something. These Indians had been locked down for a very long time. I mean, Team Natarajan still hasn't met his daughter. She's going to college next month. But as sad as that is, I'm not sure it really compares to what happened to Mohammad Siraj, who couldn't go to his own father's funeral. And it's great to say that these players get paid a lot of money and get treated incredibly well and live the dream that many of us have, but they are still humans. And these are tricky times. And there is a zoo feeling to COVID's professional sport. We rushed back sport in a pandemic so we wouldn't be bored. We made young people perform their jobs for us while the world was still ill. There's going to be issues. They're going to be upset. They're going to hug random strangers who have bought them average-looking meals. It is worth pointing out that Australia did play in this series, and we could spend a lot of time focusing on the fact that they had their 4 first-choice bowlers all the way through the series and won 1 test. But there was something even kind of more fun about Australia, and it was their batting. Their opening batting. They started the series by opening the batting with Matthew Wade, because there is no place in the order that apparently he can't underwhelm in. And they also had Joe Burns, which seemed like an act of cruelty against Joe Burns. He played the most painful 10-ball innings I can remember I can remember. How many times do you remember 10-ball innings? I mean, and in total, Australia played, 5 openers? I mean, get ready for that question in, your next pub quiz in 2032. And then Australia finally moved on to David Warner. And I cannot remember the last time Australia took someone in who was that obviously injured. I mean, how worried did Australia have to be at that point? Most of us were thinking India were falling apart, but Australia was picking Warner and he could barely walk. And it was quite clear Australia was looking for saviours. They'd already picked 2 young ones. But as it turned out, Australia didn't need David Warner's groin. They had Steve Smith, and he found his test hands. Let's be honest, you had forgotten about Steve Smith's hands, hadn't you? And that's okay. That makes sense. This series has had so many things. Who's going to remember Steve Smith's hands and how he found them, and whether they were white ball hands or red ball hands, even though this was one of the more bizarre quotes in modern cricket history. But certainly he found something for Sydney, because he made 100. And then Cheteshwar Pujara went out there and gave the game away by batting pretty much how he always has in Australia. After that, something actually bad happened. 2 Indian players reported being racially abused from the crowd. And Mohammad Siraj stopped the test, which in itself is just such a remarkable thing. I mean, there should be no question that we don't want racism in cricket. But apparently this keeps needing to be said. So, I don't know. Fuck racism and everyone who believes that they are better than another person for any stupid reason. But what an effort from Siraj to change how we deal with it. What an effort it was for him to stand up and make a big deal out of this and make himself part of the story. It's incredibly brave from him. What a shame he had to do it though. Just to recap this series, just the last couple of things I've mentioned. Steve Smith's hands, Pujara batting too slow, racism on the cricket field. Now we're going to talk about Steve Smith's feet. But I want to focus just on how weird this series is. We went from talking about racism to Steve Smith scratching a part of the pitch that 21 other players had already scratched. I mean, it became the most rewatched footage since the Zapruder film. And I don't think Steve Smith needed to be at that crease, and I don't care if he's done it a million times or not. But he didn't affect the match, and it became such a big thing. Steve Smith's feet became the absolute most India-Australian thing in this series. When it comes to India and Australian cricket, we can make anything a big deal. And while that was all going on, Pujara, the man who had lost the match in the first innings, was somehow saving the match in the second, while Rishabh Pant was batting doused in kerosene that he'd brought from home. And then 2 injured batsmen, neither of whom would play in the next test, limped to a draw. Ashwin had no back, and Vihari had no hamstrings, and between them they made like 1 functioning batsman, and at one stage Ashwin's chest pad was like the biggest star. And of course we can't forget Tim Payne in all of this, for questioning all the friends that Ashwin had, and inviting him to enjoy the climate of Queensland. But India was still going into that last test with a second, maybe third 11, series level, and if that wasn't remarkable enough, an Australian player apologised for his behaviour on the field. I'm sorry if I missed your favourite crazy thing that happened, because I'm sure there was a lot more that has gone on. Wasn't there that weird Vihari tweet when some guy who didn't know anything about cricket said he didn't know anything about cricket, and Vihari made fun of him because he couldn't spell Vihari's name right? I'm sure there's like 27 other things. If you're like following this on Reddit or on Facebook or in your auntie's WhatsApp group or whatever, I'm sure you found like a million other things that were ridiculous about this series. And that is because there were a million ridiculous things about this series. Like, for instance, the next test, India didn't have Jasprit Bumrah, Vihari, Ashwin, Jadeja. At best, they were bowling with their 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th best bowlers. And that's probably not even true. They're probably not even that high. I mean, Washington Sundar hadn't played a first-class game in 1,144 days. And he was in a test with India behind, probably batting higher than anyone would have ever wanted for him against the highest-ranked seam bowling attack in the world. It wasn't a first-choice cricket team. It was net bowlers, injured substitutes, IPL failures, grieving sons, racism victims, new fathers, social media punching bags, and guys who like hitting white balls around. And we'll look at what this Indian third 11 had to do. They had to chase over 300 against Pat Cummins and Josh Hazlewood at the Gabba. The Gabba. I mean, the Gabba hadn't been defeated since the best team in cricket did it. And they didn't do it against Pat Cummins with a bunch of second choice options. They did it with pretty much one of their strongest lineups ever. You don't win at the Gabba. You don't chase at the Gabba. This is where Tim Paine wanted India. This is where teams come to die. It's called the Gabatoire. 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 And it looked like Pujara might actually be hurt. Australia attacked his groin, hand, arm, chest, neck, face. Even the butterflies were attacking him. And it wasn't just the butterflies. His fans had attacked him. Ex-players. Commentators talk more about his strike rate than Americans discuss primaries. And he batted on his way from the first ball until the last. And around him, they just kept finding these incredible young guys like Shubman Gill, who took 20 from a Mitchell Stark over and hit quite a few more from quite a few other overs. That Washington Sundar kid I mentioned before, the only reason he played a test was a global pandemic and his team literally going through a playing injury pandemic. Literally, the world had to fall apart for Washington Sundar to play a test. And this kid kind of making up the numbers, pulled the world's best bowler for 6 and then slashed him for a 4 next ball and completely changed the game. And then there was Pan, who is on his own just crazy and brilliant and fun and everything. He was not even selected for the first test and he was eviscerated for the second test, and for the third he went out just when he was about to win the game. It was Pant that was kind of involved with everything. He was a substitute. He was a star. He was an embarrassment. He couldn't do anything right. He couldn't do anything wrong. Pant hugged a total stranger for paying his meal. He should have had his arm broken. He broke hearts with the bat on both sides and he made these party runs. And then India won against the Gabba, chasing 300. Pat Cummins, Australia at home, with no captain, and net bowlers. It's every bit as crazy as it sounds. And it was magnificent.